In this Baldur's Gate 3 video, we'll be taking a look at all the races and their features to figure out which race is the best for each class. Of course, depending on how you plan to play a given class, the best race changes, so I've got a couple of top picks depending on the class. Let's get started with Elf. So the Elves have the typical base racial speed of 9 meters per turn, so nothing special there. What is interesting though is Elven weapon training. You have proficiency in longsword, shortbow, and longbow. So this benefits a couple of classes. Bards already have longsword, short sword, and short bow proficiency by default, but gain access to longbow through this. Clerics already have short bow proficiency, but will gain longsword, longbow, and short sword. Then druids, wizards, and sorcerers are all going to gain the most from this, who have none of the proficiencies by default, which means they'll gain all 4. Monks already have short sword and short bow proficiency, but will gain longsword and longbow. And rogues will actually benefit slightly, gaining only longbow proficiency, already having the other 3. Warlocks are proficient in shortbow by default, gaining longsword, short sword, and longbow. The other classes, fighter, barbarian, paladin, and ranger, can already use all weapons, so they don't benefit from this at all. When it comes to dark vision, this is pretty typical. 12 meter dark vision. This can still be helpful in places where there isn't light. If you're playing a ranged class, 12 meters can be very helpful. And then Fey Ancestry, giving you advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put you to sleep. This is definitely helpful in certain situations. What's not listed on this character sheet is actually that you will get proficiency in perception as an elf. Anyone can benefit from this, but I think the character leading the way is going to be benefiting from this the most because they'll have the first chance to perceive something. And then if we go over to the sub races, we've got high elf and wood elf. If you go high elf, you get access to a cantrip, and you can actually choose a couple of these. You see it says right here it uses your intelligence as its modifier. So I think this benefits particularly wizards the most, who use intelligence as their primary ability. There are some utility cantrips here like friends, which will give you advantage on charisma checks. So if you want to have a party leader be a high elf, this is definitely one option as well. And then also when we go to the wood elf, we get fleet of foot, movement speed increased by 1.5 meters. So this is definitely helpful for a melee character to be able to get around more quickly, get into melee range much more easily. And then what also isn't listed here as a wood elf, you do also get stealth proficiency. So wood elves actually get quite a lot. You get stealth proficiency, fleet of foot. You also get all of the elf abilities such as Fey Ancestry, dark vision, and elven weapon training. So wood elf definitely offers a lot, and then that perception as well from just being an elf. So lots to offer there for the elves. All right, up next is the Tiefling. They have the regular 9 meter base racial speed. They've got the typical 12 meter dark vision. Not every race gets dark vision, but this is the typical amount. And this can be helpful again for ranged characters in dark places. They do have a very cool hellish resistance race feature, giving resistance to fire damage, taking only half damage from it. This is definitely very helpful in scenarios where the ground's on fire. Maybe you're a melee character and you can really be able to get through fire without taking as much damage as other races would. When it comes to the sub races, we've got Asmodeus Tiefling, Mephistopheles Tiefling, and Zariel Tiefling. Now these actually can get very interesting. You can't tell from the character creation screen too much because it doesn't actually list out what you get later, but the Asmodeus Tiefling at level 1 is going to get this cantrip Produce Flame. This actually creates light in a 9 meter radius, so if you're a melee character you can create light for your ranged characters in dark places. You can also throw it and deal some fire damage. At level 3 you'll get Hellish Rebuke. This is a reaction to your attacker and you can deal fire damage to them, and you can set this to be used automatically, which is kind of nice. Then at level 5 you get Darkness, which creates a cloud of magical darkness that heavily obscures and blinds creatures within. So Asmodeus is pretty good. I think this fits definitely for a melee character who is going to be getting attacked and can use that Hellish Rebuke or even create Darkness to use as a sort of to blind some creatures as well. So I think Asmodeus is great for melee characters. When it comes to the Mephistopheles Tiefling, they can at level 1 create the Mage Hand, which can manipulate and interact with objects. Level 3 they get Burning Hands. Each flammable target is hit with 3 to 18 fire damage. Then level 5 Flame Blade, conjure a flaming scimitar that deals 3 to 18 damage and sheds light as well. Flame Blade is actually quite a strong ability, and I think it's really good with Druid actually. Druids actually also get Flame Blade, but it's actually quite powerful, and Mephistopheles Tiefling is quite a good pick. And then finally we have Zariel Tiefling. They start out with Thaumaturgy, which gives advantage on intimidation and performance checks. So really good for a character leading the dialogue if you want to intimidate your way, if you want to go like a soldier, charismatic soldier who wants to use intimidation. Zariel Tiefling fits really well with that. At level 3 you get Searing Smite to deal an extra 1 to 6 fire damage and set your target on fire, and then they take fire damage every turn. And then at level 5, you get Branding Smite, which marks your target with light, preventing it from turning invisible. So I can see this definitely being some type of melee character who also uses charisma. I'm thinking something like a Paladin would fit really well with the Zariel Tiefling. You get the Thaumaturgy, you get Searing Smite for your melee attacks, Branding Smite for your melee attacks as well, and you're also a character with, as if you're a Paladin, your charisma improves your spell casting, so you're a perfect dialogue character as well. So everything just fits together if you want to play a Paladin Zariel Tiefling. Moving on to Drow, we have the typical 9-meter base racial speed, but we also have Drow weapon training, proficiency with the rapier, short sword, and hand crossbow. This definitely can benefit a lot of different classes. Rogue, Paladin, Ranger, Barbarian, Bard, and Fighter already have all these proficiencies. However, the usual suspects, Druid, Cleric, Warlock, Wizard, and Sorcerer will gain all 3 of these proficiencies, having absolutely none of them baseline. Monks can already use short swords, so they will gain hand, crossbow, and rapier proficiency through Drow weapon training. But other than that, I would say this is probably one of the weaker weapon trainings, considering most classes already have access to them. Dark Vision is actually much better than typical. It's double what other Dark Vision gives. Superior Dark Vision can see in the dark up to 24 meters. So if you want a ranged character that it will not matter if you're in the light or the dark, Drow is definitely the way to go. And then Fey Ancestry, they also have this as well, gaining advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put you to sleep. So that's really strong actually to have this. And then when it comes to the sub races, I've noticed that you actually just get dialogue options depending on which one you choose. There's actually no other benefit that I've found so far. Just it also affects your appearance slightly. You can see here you get red eyes as a Lolth Sworn Drow, and then Celadrine does not have those red eyes. So yeah, the difference between the two simply seems to be dialogue, different dialogue options for RP. All right, moving on to the human, they've got the typical 9-meter base racial speed. Civil Militia actually is going to give them a pretty good number of proficiencies. You get weapon proficiency with spears, pikes, halberds, glaives, and armor proficiency with light armor and shields. This can benefit quite a number of different classes. Classes that benefit from this are Druids, Bards, Monks, Clerics, Wizards, Sorcerers, and Warlocks. They can already use spears, but they'll gain pikes, halberds, and glaives. Monks, Sorcerer, and Wizard can all benefit from the light armor proficiency, having none previously, and many classes can benefit from being able to use a shield. And so this is actually pretty good if you want to play some type of spellcaster and throw a shield on there for additional armor. Human versatility I think is actually really cool. Selecting an additional skill to be proficient in is really great, and then your carrying capacity is increased by 1/4. I actually think this is perfect for a class that has strength as their primary ability. The reason for that is because strength determines your carrying capacity, and if you are already building up your carrying capacity, this is going to increase that by 1/4. And so you can really create sort of like a mule character where they pick up all the items and have a really big carrying capacity. If you play a human fighter, a human barbarian, classes that basically use strength as their primary ability that you'll be trying to increase as much as possible. So I think humans are perfect for being your character that can carry a bunch of your stuff. Next up we have Githyanki. This race is actually really interesting. They get Astral Knowledge, which gives proficiency in all skills of a chosen ability. Now basically your chosen ability are these over here, like strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, right? And so you can actually see these different skills have labels. So athletics is strength, acrobatics is dexterity, and actually depending on each skill you're looking at, they're going to be different, right? And so actually if you look at its strength, athletics is the only strength skill, and so being able to choose a single ability, so let's say strength, you get all of the proficiencies that fall under that, which is really strong. Of course you probably wouldn't want to choose strength because you'd only get athletics, but if you choose something that you're weak in, like these intelligence based ones, you can see this barbarian has -1 to all these intelligence ones, you could use Astral Knowledge to become proficient in them. So you could get proficient in Arcana, History, Investigation, and Nature, all thanks to Astral Knowledge. So basically what's really cool about this action is that it can really cover where your character is weak. So if you're playing a barbarian, you're really strong with strength proficiencies and even dexterity, but you really fall off with intelligence. And so you could basically choose, I want to be proficient with intelligence skills, and you gain all of these, or even charisma ones where they're a little bit weaker. And so depending on your class, your skill proficiencies would be different, and you can cover your weaknesses using this amazing action called Astral Knowledge. So I think this is actually good for pretty much any class. Another race feature is the cantrips Githyanki Psionics Mage Hand. Create an invisible spectral hand that can manipulate and interact with objects. That can be useful for any class, I think. And then we have the Martial Prodigy. A lifetime of relentless training gives you armor proficiency with light and medium armor, as well as proficiency with short sword, long sword, and great sword. I think this is really great for the usual suspects, spellcasters who can't use medium armor, or some classes that don't even have light armor. And so I think that Githyanki is actually really good for spellcasters to gain Martial Prodigy on top of the Astral Knowledge. So they're getting a lot out of playing Githyanki. All right, next up is Dwarf. Base racial speed, you'll notice, is 7.5 meters per turn, which is much less than the other races. So you are sacrificing some movement speed if you're playing a Dwarf. So keep that in mind if you want to play a melee character. It will take you longer to get into melee range. Dwarven combat training gives you proficiency with a battle axe, hand axe, light hammer, and war hammer. A lot of the classes that would be in melee range already have these, so I don't find this too helpful. The dark vision is typical, but still somewhat helpful, 12 meters. And then we've got Dwarven resilience. You have advantage on saving throws against poison and have resistance to poison damage. So that can be situationally helpful. And then these subclasses are actually really interesting. So the Gold Dwarf gets Dwarven toughness. Your hit point maximum is increased by 1 and increases by 1 again every time you gain a level. So the max level in Baldur's Gate 3 is 12, and so you can get a maximum of 12 additional hit points. This is good for every single class, so if you are finding that you want your character to have more health, definitely go after Gold Dwarf to make your character basically live longer. Shield Dwarf I also find equally interesting. Dwarven armor training gives you armor proficiency with light and medium armor. This is also the only other place besides Githyanki to get armor proficiency with medium armor. So if you are a spellcaster and you don't want to play Githyanki, but you do want to get medium armor on your character, then Shield Dwarf is your only other option. You do also get dark vision along with that and the other dwarf racial features, so it's a little different than Githyanki if you're looking for something else that also grants increased armor. The Duergar has some interesting things as well. Superior dark vision, which previously, up until now, it was just the Drow that we were able to get that 24 meter dark vision. So if you're looking for a ranged class that can see really far in the dark, Duergar Dwarf is a great choice. And then Duergar Resilience, advantage in saving throws against illusions and against being charmed or paralyzed. So you also are getting poison resistance from being dwarf, and then you're also on top of that getting advantage against illusions and being charmed or paralyzed. So you're getting a lot if you play a Duergar Dwarf. All right, next up is Half Elf, and the Half Elf is very similar to Elf. The main difference is that instead of Elven weapon training, they have Civil Militia, which is from the human race feature. So they get all the weapon and armor proficiencies from that, but they also get the Dark Vision and Fey Ancestry. You can also choose the regular subraces as well. Do note that unlike elves, you do not get perception for being a half elf. You still get the high elf cantrip. Again, you'd probably want to use this on something like a wizard. When it comes to the wood elf, wood half elf, you're going to get that increased move speed still, and you are going to get that bonus to stealth as a skill. And then drow half elf, you can use the dancing lights to help see in the dark. Illuminates a 9 meter radius. So I can see wood half elf being a pretty good choice for a number of different classes, gaining that stealth and increased move speed, on top of also civil militia and dark vision. Halfling is next, and we've got a base racial speed of 7.5 meters. This is just like dwarf. It's lower because they have shorter legs. They can't move as far. They also have this really cool race feature called Lucky. When you roll a 1 for an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll. It is possible to roll a 1 again. However, Lucky is definitely going to help you out in those cases where you critically fail. Brave gives you advantage on saving throws against being frightened, which is really cool. There's definitely a number of things that can frighten your characters in this game. Now, what I find pretty interesting are the subraces. We've got Lightfoot Halfling, which gives naturally stealthy. You have advantage on stealth checks, so this can be helpful for rogues or rangers who have some different abilities based off of stealth. And then Strong Heart Halfling, advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage. So kind of similar to Dwarf in that respect, but you also get Lucky and Brave. Halfling is kind of an interesting class. Because of the lower base racial speed, I feel like you probably want to be a ranged character if you're going to go with this. All right, next up is Gnome. They've got that same lower base racial speed that halflings and dwarfs have, and they have Gnome Cunning. You have advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. This is actually really, really strong because depending on what primary ability you have, let's say your primary ability is strength, then it's going to cover your weaknesses with intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, which might be lower. And so that Gnome Cunning actually can fill fill in gaps with your character. When it comes to subrace, there's actually some really cool options here. Probably some of my favorite stuff, actually. So Rock Gnome gets 12 meter dark vision, which is typical. And then we've got Artificer's Lore, add twice your proficiency bonus to history checks. So that's kind of cool. Again, history is something that is an intelligence proficiency. With a class like Barbarian, where your intelligence is really low, this can actually help cover your weakness once again with that history proficiency. The Forest Gnome's pretty interesting too, kind of giving a druidic spin on Gnome. It gives you speak with animals, gain the ability to comprehend and communicate with beasts. This is another intelligence based spell. So, you know, if you want a character that might not typically have speak with animals, then this is a way to get it when you otherwise might not be able to get it with your type of class, which is really cool. You also get that 12 meter dark vision. And then one of my favorites here is actually Deep Gnome. They get 24 meter superior dark vision. So this is one of 3 ways to get this. Really, really strong for ranged characters in the dark. And then they also have Stone Camouflage, which is crazy. You have advantage on stealth checks. So I actually think this is one of the best options if you want to play a ranged stealth class, something like a rogue or ranger, because you're getting advantage on stealth checks, and you can see in the dark 24 meters. So you can be stealthy and see in the dark extremely far for your ranged attacks, which is just a really great combo. And we're on to the Dragonborn. This is a race that I find to be one of the most interesting. As you can see, their base race feature is just normal movement speed, but then as you look at the subraces, they have the most subraces out of any other race, and it's different based on their colors. So you've got black Dragonborn, blue Dragonborn, and so on. And depending on which color of subrace you choose, you're going to have different actions and subrace features. So for example, if you're a blue Dragonborn, you're going to get lightning breath, and you're going to have resistant to lightning damage. So whatever breath you have, you'll also have resistant to that damage. So you can see here as a green Dragonborn, you'll get poison breath and resistant to poison damage. And the same goes for white dragon. You get frost breath and resistant to cold damage. So depending on how you want to specialize your character and put together your party, you can definitely choose a certain type of color Dragonborn you want to be to get a certain resistance that maybe is fitting in a gap in some of your party. Like maybe, you know, there's a lot of poison resistance with the other classes, so maybe you want to go with a different resistance. Maybe you want to be resistant to acid damage through Copper Dragonborn, but it's up to you. I find it kind of interesting. It's kind of cool also that you get to use acid breath as a class action to do that specific type of damage as well. All right, and last up we have Half-Orc. Here we've got base racial speed at 9 meters, which is typical, dark vision up to 12 meters, and relentless endurance, which is really strong. If you reach 0 hit points, you regain 1 hit point instead of becoming downed. This is essentially granting you a second chance when you would have gotten downed to not get downed, and getting downed is terrible in combat, and so this is actually really strong, particularly I would say for melee characters who are going to be getting hit a lot. So I think that definitely favors a melee character, but any character can benefit from this. Savage attacks, though, will definitely benefit a melee character. It says when you land a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, your damage dice are tripled instead of doubled. So this gives you a huge opportunity to do massive damage in a melee range. And so this is really great for classes like Fighter, Paladin, Barbarian, and believe it or not, it's actually not going to be really good for Monk because it has to be with a melee weapon attack. So if you are attacking unarmed, you aren't going to get savage attacks, and that's been tested and proven. So Half-Orc is a really, really strong choice in my opinion for melee fighters. All right, and in this last section, I want to give you my top picks for each class, starting with the Barbarian. So there's a lot of different benefits you get from a lot of different races, but my top pick is going to be Half-Orc because savage attacks, you'll get your damage dice tripled instead of doubled when you land a critical hit. That's my top pick for Barbarians. My second pick would be Human. If you want to get that increased carrying capacity, if you want a character that can just carry so much, then I would definitely go with Human because Barbarians are primarily their primary ability is strength, and so I can see getting a lot of strength, getting a lot of carrying capacity, and then increasing that by 25% could be getting the biggest inventory that is possible in Baldur's Gate 3. So 2 options there, depending on how you want to specialize your Barbarian. All right, next up is the Bard. The best race for the Bard, in my opinion, is going to be the Shield Dwarf. And the reason for that is because of the medium armor from Dwarven Armor Training, the 12 meters of dark vision that you're getting right here, and then also the advantage on saving throws against poison, and you have resistance to poison damage. Bards are going to be able to be more tanky with that increased armor. They do use some ranged abilities, so dark vision can be very helpful as well. I think that resistance to poison and poison damage can be very helpful. And so overall, I think Shield Dwarf is the best choice. And then also being a dwarf, having the base racial speed lower doesn't matter as much as Bard using a lot of ranged spells. The second choice I would choose would be Githyanki, and the reason for that, of course, is that amazing astral knowledge for getting all proficiencies. You also get that medium armor proficiency from Martial Prodigy, so it's very comparable to the Shield Dwarf. So next up is Cleric, and the best Cleric in my opinion would be Wood Elf. I think Fleetfoot is extremely good for a Cleric so that you can move quickly to whoever might need a heal, because you actually get Healing Touch, which is a stronger heal that you use when you're in melee range of someone who needs a heal. So Fleet of Foot is actually helpful to go and use Healing Touch on whoever might need it. Then on top of that, you are getting Perception, you are getting Stealth, and you also are getting Fey Ancestry. As a healer for your party, getting advantage on saving throws against being charmed and magic can't put you to sleep, I think is actually really important to make sure your healer can keep healing your party. So I think Wood Elf is the best for a Cleric, and then second, Githyanki. Again, Astral Knowledge is super strong for all those proficiencies. All right, moving on to Druid. The best race for Druid, in my opinion, is the Mephistopheles Tiefling, and the reason for that is because you are going to eventually get Flame Blade, and you can use a torch as a one-handed club and use Shillelagh on it, which is this amazing transmutation cantrip, making it magical and deal bludgeoning damage, and it uses your spellcasting ability for attack rolls, which is Wisdom for the Druid. You can actually make a Druid that does really good melee damage using Shillelagh on top of the Flame Scimitar or Flame Blade. It's actually really powerful. There's a great combo. You can get Flame Circlet and just get a lot of extra attacks. So Druid actually can become very powerful as a Mephistopheles Tiefling, in my opinion, or even without it, because Flame Blade is a spell that Druids can learn as well. But if you want to get a different spell, it can free up a spell slot if you play as a Mephistopheles Tiefling. And my second best choice for Druid is actually going to be Half-Orc, and the reason for this is because Savage Attacks actually works if you are a wild shape Druid, believe it or not. So it's kind of interesting that it doesn't work with a monk, but it does work if you shapeshift. So it says if you land a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, your damage dice are tripled instead of doubled. So if you want to turn into a wolf or a bear, you are actually going to get savage attacks as that animal. This, I think, is extremely powerful. So depending on how you want to play your Druid, I think you could go the Mephistopheles Tiefling, or you could go the Half-Orc for some really crazy melee damage as a wild shape Druid. Really cool. Probably what I'm going to roll next on my next playthrough. All right, this brings us on to the fighter class. So the fighter, I think, is going to be pretty straightforward. Half-Orc is number one, again, for that amazing savage attacks, and then number two, you could go human for that really amazing carrying capacity that I don't think any other class is going to be able to get to. So pretty straightforward, either Half-Orc or human for fighter. When it comes to monk, I would say the best race for a monk would be an Asmodeus Tiefling, and the reason for Asmodeus Tiefling is because they get Hellish Rebuke, they can produce flame, darkness, all favor a melee class. You really don't want any of the armor proficiencies, because monks actually gain class features, unarmored defense, bonus unarmed strike, and so they actually don't want any armor proficiencies or weapon proficiencies that other races will give. So Asmodeus Tiefling, I think, has some really great bonuses that are other than those proficiencies. And again, Half-Orc savage attacks don't work for monks since they don't use a weapon. And then actually that hellish resistance that you get from being a Tiefling helps since you're a melee character as well. So I really think it's actually the only option. I think if you're going to play monk, I think your best choice would be Asmodeus Tiefling. Okay, moving on to the Paladin. I think the best choice for the Paladin is going to be, like all of the other melee classes, Half-Orc. Half-Orc Paladin is going to crush in melee range thanks to savage attacks. You can do some really ridiculous damage as a Half-Orc Paladin with your different smite skills and savage attacks. I think it's really just the way to go. You will notice that the primary ability of Paladins is strength, so you absolutely could put a bunch of strength in your Paladin and then also go human for that human versatility to increase your carrying capacity and just have a really huge inventory human Paladin as well. So two options there, Half-Orc or human, I feel like for the Paladin is a great way to go. Now, really interestingly, let's talk about the Ranger. The Ranger actually, I think, can be a really, really cool deep gnome. So if you go gnome and you go deep gnome, you're going to notice that you're going to get stone camouflage, advantage on stealth checks. So as a ranger, you can attack from range and get a lot of different stealth abilities. Stone camouflage is going to give you that advantage on stealth checks, but also being a ranged character, you can sometimes miss in the dark, but superior dark vision is going to give you 24 meters of being able to see in the dark. So not only do you get an advantage on stealth checks, you also can see super well in the dark, so your ranged attacks are going to be able to hit. Not to mention you're also going to have gnome cunning, giving you advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, which, since you are dexterity primary ability class, that this really covers all the other bases where you might not have advantage on saving throws otherwise. And then having the lower base racial speed doesn't matter as much because you're a ranged class, and so you're most likely going to just be not moving very much and just using your ranged attacks every turn. So I think Deep Gnome fits perfectly for Ranger, a ranged stealth attacker. They basically get the most out of anything from this, of course. Maybe you don't like the way a Deep Gnome looks, totally understandable, but I think their subrace features are just too good if you want to play a Ranger. Now next up is the Rogue. Now rogues also have sneak attack, a ranged attack based off of stealth or having advantage. I actually think they also fall into the same exact bucket of having superior dark vision at as a deep gnome, having the stone camouflage, advantage on stealth checks. I think you should also go deep gnome as the best for a rogue. Now, one thing I do want to mention that I forgot with Ranger is that if you want to play a stealth class that is not ranged, you should definitely go actually Wood Elf. So if you want to play a stealth character that mainly uses melee attacks, then the Wood Elf is the best choice because they're getting a bonus to stealth. You can actually see it says right here, X2 on stealth, X2 sleight of hand. So Wood Elves actually get increased stealth proficiency. They get increased movement speed. So if you're playing melee, you want to be able to get in melee range faster. And then you're also getting Fey Ancestry, which is nice. Your dark vision's not as far, but doesn't matter because you're going to be in melee range anyways. You actually have further base racial speed. I think it's really great. Fleet of Foot is better for getting more quickly into melee range. You still get the stealth advantage from being a wood elf, and you also get perception from being an elf. So there's a lot of advantages if you want to play a melee stealth character. You can use sneak attack melee. So I would say if you're not going ranged, then definitely go Wood Elf. And then finally, we get to the Sorcerer. Sorcerer is really, really cool. I would say the number one choice for Sorcerer is going to fall into the Shield Dwarf camp, thanks to the armor proficiency with light and medium armor. Getting medium armor on your Sorcerer I think is going to be really strong. You get the 12 meter of dark vision since you're ranged, and then you're also going to get advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage from being a dwarf. I think it's overall more beneficial than playing Githyanki, but I would say Githyanki is the second choice because you'll also get medium armor on your Sorcerer, and you'll also get astral knowledge. So it depends on what you're looking for, but I just think the dark vision, being able to see in the dark, in addition to the medium armor and the resilience, is probably more bonuses than playing Githyanki. And the same thing goes, in my opinion, for Warlock. Gaining access to medium armor from Dwarven armor training, the dark vision, and the poison resistance I think are all really great. All right, next up is Wizard. So the best race without comparison, in my opinion, is the high half-elf for the Wizard. And the reason for that is because being a half-elf, you're going to gain access to Civil Militia, which will give you access to light armor, which you wouldn't have already. You're also going to get some nice dark vision and Fey Ancestry, which is definitely nice. But also, as playing as a high half-elf, you get access to the high elf cantrip. It uses your intelligence as its modifier, and wizards are the only class that have their primary ability as intelligence. So as you continue to level, your high elf cantrip will continue to get more powerful with you. And so I think that if you're going to play wizard, I think it's pretty black and white. The best race for that would be high half-elf. All right, and that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to click that like button, subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 videos, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.